anytime you try to deal with traffic and congestion, there's really three ways that we identified, or three buckets you can put them into. One would be technology, two would be behavior modification, and three would be what's known as hardscape. Hardscape being the most difficult because it's the longest and it's the most expensive. Sanibel, through the MPO, was rated the top one intersection out of 18 to have a roundabout. The problem is the study was to do the roundabout, but only take care of the roundabout. What we found, and the roundabout was going to be at the intersection of Lingman, Periwinkle, and Causeway Boulevard, which we seem to have the greatest congestion leaving the island and or coming onto the island. Problem that we found out during the study is it has really two problems with the roundabout. You have to widen the road entering into the roundabout and widen the road exiting the roundabout, which would have required us to make major construction issues, and we would have had to have the county come along for the bridge to be widened, the toll plaza to be reconstructed. So it started off to be about $1.5 million to $2 million project, ended up having a cost of $20+ million associated with it. That was the first hurdle, which was significant. The majority of the people don't like roundabouts. We have an older community and certainly was not comfortable with that. So there was as many people that were for it that were against it. So knowing the timeframes, knowing the type of funding that was required, we backed up and said, okay, what can we control in our jurisdiction? Really, the first one was technology, and how do we utilize technology? Sanibel, through a very inexpensive process, developed an application called Sanibel Bound. It really linked Waze and some of the other maps that are available and traffic guides that are available that would enable you to utilize that, as well as
yep, once every 6 months.
An awful lot of cameras that we installed from the causeway all the way through on Periwinkle, so our residents also can look at any time to do that. So two things that accomplished: one, to give the ability to look at where the traffic is building up, and two, if you're in the traffic, to utilize the Sanibel Bound as an application to determine obviously how to navigate through that if you could. Also giving the people an opportunity to understand the traffic they were in. Furthermore, we worked with the county to place signs prior to coming to the causeway in right-of-ways to let people know. A lot of the traffic had to do with beach and beach conditions and or public parking. We wanted them to know when public parking was paid and or full, to obviously let them be aware that there's no parking. So if you were contemplating coming to the beach, when parking became full, you might be coming and not having opportunities. So between the communication really and utilizing technology, we had the ability with the signs that were placed before the causeway on an iPad to change the messaging as it changed. You know, if you had an accident on the causeway, if you had an accident on Periwinkle, again, change the message very quickly. And we were, with the work of the county, enabled to change the messaging ourselves. So technology went a long way, a very inexpensive way, but probably what the residents wanted the most was to give some type of relief to ease down some of the congestion. None of the issues, with the exception of hardscape, would really give you the relief you wanted to, but hardscape really was just too expensive and too far out in the future, and everybody wanted some type of ability to relieve right away. Additional, what we did was, as a result of the causeway, we tried to find factual information when the peaks were coming over the causeway, when they were leaving. The good news is, having a toll bridge, we were able to identify traffic flow, having you know, when the peak hours were, not only coming on the island but leaving the island, to give our residents an opportunity if they wanted to make appointments in town and do the various things that they might look at when it would be best to travel. A lot of our citizenry were retired senior citizens, certainly having the flexibility. So maybe making that doctor appointment at 1 o'clock as opposed to 9 or 10 o'clock, might be a better time. So we were able to give that in a very consolidated way. The county was able to work with us, provide us data that we were able to then pass along to our residents to enable them to adjust their behavior. I mean, that was really the intent of it. Again, trying to come up with as many ways to ease the traffic as possible and or give people the greatest and latest information so they understood the situation as best they could. And again, we probably, all things considered, over a long period of time, probably invested, probably $70,000 or $80,000 in total, and that's for a variety of cameras. And the cameras started to become less expensive as we put more cameras in. It was really from Fort Myers Beach that we really borrowed the concept of the cameras. That really just gave people an opportunity to look at the various hotspots and understand where the congestion might be, where to navigate through it. And then it was really our IT department that decided to work with Apple, and the app really was something that I think we initiated, but I think now the technology's there, might be a lot easier to do it the second time around if someone's done this, to enable. And what we had was our visitors and our residents download the application to help them navigate through the situation. So we used a lot of the tools that were available to us to try to dissect and or to address the issues that we had associated with this. Because hardscape were just too difficult, too long, too expensive, and there was no consensus whatsoever on roundabouts. So, and that's kind of the quick overview summary. I can certainly pause for a moment, answer any questions and or thoughts you might have as we navigated through this for a number of years. What we did find pre-COVID is we had over a 3-year period of time about a 6 to 8% decrease in traffic during our peak times, and certainly just eased. And it's like taking a faucet that's opened all the way and just turning it down a little bit. It's not going to eliminate. There's no way to go from 7,000 people to 40,000 people. You look at the causeway, and we knew the increased volume based on hourly counts, based on daily counts. And when you're having 3.3 to 3.6 million people come over the causeway in a given year, or approximately 300,000 people on an average, or some of the peak months, it might be as many as 400. When you start to look at hours that people travel, you really have an awful lot of cars coming over at any particular hour, and you were able to identify that. So I mean, those are some of the things we did to work with the county and try to give our visitors as well as our residents more information so they can react, very quickly. And it really was not a time-consuming thing, nor did it take long to implement.
Well, Commissioner,
I have a question.
I like the idea of the cameras very much. It'd be nice to go on my computer, because there's been days that I drove out to that 4-way stop and saw the traffic backed up all the way to there, and then even further in some cases, and just turned around and came home. Or got halfway across Little Pine Island, and there was a couple places you can turn around. I turned around there too and come home. But we did, I talked to Randy Searchy, who's the director of League DOT, and he said he was out here 5 or 6 years ago, and they got pretty much run off the island for suggesting a traffic light or a roundabout. So I'm not sure how that will work. I mean, that's what you said too, pretty much. People don't trust roundabouts; they're not used to them, and but the problem is really Matt Lachey getting stuck, and that's where the traffic backs up. And there's a couple of hot spots, but one thing that irritates me, and I don't know if the county can do anything about it, is when a single sailboat in the middle of rush hour during season has that bridge raised, because they don't feel like lowering their mast or going around the other side of Pine Island on their tour, And is there any way that maybe we could restrict the hours that the bridge is raised for at least recreational boats? I mean, I know the guys at Commercial Fish, they have, urgent problems. They got to get that fish to market. But is there any way that maybe we could restrict the hours that bridge is raised, at least during season?
Again, we had some experience with that.
I'll jump in here.
We had some experience with that at Sanibel before there was a causeway. We had
In Alamorada, the bridge in Alamorada, the bridge in Alamorada was deemed to be a problem in the Keys traffic, and they went to a schedule. So the boaters know that they shouldn't even bother coming to the bridge until there's going to be an opening. So it can be done, Scott.
We did something like that when we had a causeway, when we had a drawbridge. We certainly worked and tried to designate certain hours. It took a lot of coordination to do so, but that's something that was done before the causeway was actually reconstructed, because we had a drawbridge from 1963 to 2007. So the gentleman who spoke, certainly it just takes coordination, takes a lot of work to do that. So that's certainly an option. The cameras were something we borrowed off of Fort Myers Beach. They had them in many different places. Like you said, Scott, it gave people an opportunity in their own home to look and say, you know what, I'll go later. Again, that fed into using technology to influence behavior and changing your behavior modification, because if you can get any information to say, here's your peak time or here's your slower time, you might make better choices.
So Kevin, what's the best way for us? I'm sorry, Kevin, what's the best way for us to work with the county staff to do that? I mean, Sanibel was a little bit different. You guys were incorporated. You had the ability to make some of those decisions. We're out here, we're at the mercy of the county. We don't really, and I don't mean that necessarily a bad way, but really the county has a lot more people than just Pine Island to worry about. So how, what's the best way we get, some FaceTime, I guess?
Well, you have some consensus if that's the way you want to go. I think the county has a lot to borrow from, not only Fort Myers Beach, but Sanibel. And, I know Sanibel would be, yes, we're a municipality. It's a little bit more organized, but we still have done a lot of the legwork that you won't have to do. And certainly, if there's consensus, first thing I would do is make sure there's a consensus to designate a group of people, reach out to the county, certainly copy me on it, and we can certainly start the initial steps of moving in a particular direction or plan. But again, I'm just trying to share some of our experiences,
right.
What we, and again, when you're first developing an app, it's time consuming, it's expensive going through an Apple. We took the short route when we did the cameras, because Fort Myers Beach gave us all of their benefits of what they learned from cameras and what you can show and what you can't show. So I think there's enough information to certainly utilize and certainly not recreate the wheel, but you would all have to come up with, what are your requests? What do you think might help? How do you help the community? Yes, you're unincorporated the county, but you're still part of the county. And certainly as someone that understands traffic and mitigation of traffic, I'm more than willing to try to help, create some of the steps and see. I just want people to recognize that this is only going to ease the traffic. It's not going to eliminate the traffic. And
right.
We had to really go out of our way with our Sanibel residents to really make them know that, and also our visitors. People wanted traffic to go away like that. That's not going to happen, because Sanibel, Scott hit it. Sanibel did not want a traffic light, never have had one, and didn't want a roundabout. I mean, there were people that thought the roundabout would be the be-all, end-all, and we were designated the top spot in 18 intersections throughout Lee County. So we had enough consensus and engineers to do that, but there's still, the community was not going to embrace that, no matter what we did.
Right. I mean, the whole center would have to change or go away here on the island if we went to a roundabout.
And not only that, but what you have is you have to look at the appropriate area and what right-of-ways you might have to acquire, what right-of-ways might come into, there's a lot of different moving parts. In the time frame you're talking about, because the first thing you need to do is have an engineer study. You have to make sure that it is diagrammed properly. Then you have to identify what's your circumference, and then say, okay, great, how's the roundabout work? Do I have enough space? I need to acquire land. What do you do if it's not right of ways? What are you going to address? Is there ever going to be eminent domain? I mean, there's issues that you can't even, really appreciate that we went through. At the end of the day, it just became too difficult, too controversial, and far too expensive.
Thank you.
This is Mike Downing. I'd like to thank Sanibel for the webcams that you have installed. They have been very, very helpful for us. And when I went on them last week and I looked at it and I said, that's exactly what Matlacha needs. We can change our behavior of when we take our trips off the island based on the webcam. And I would like for the Greater Pine Island Civic Association and Lee County to work together towards a webcam in Matlacha so we can plan our trips accordingly.
Sounds good to me.
And I think, Scott, if you're, as you listen to this, as you have your own discussion, come up with what thoughts you have, certainly address an email to me, a letter to me, and, let's start the first steps. But, you all need to talk about it and become, what you'd like and how you want to address it. There's a lot of parts that we went over in Sanibel. I could certainly, also give you the city manager's contact info. You might want to look at some of the information we gathered. You might want to have just some of the steps and things you laid out. So someone, again, has done the legwork, has done the procedure. It makes it a lot easier from an admin, since you don't really have administration people helping you.
Is there any chance in Matlacha to A, either put some kind of a parking garage, or B, have but traffic meters along the road where it parks? And then with the camera, we could say the lots are full, which might deter people from coming into Matlacha, holding all the traffic up. It's really a problem, especially during season. I mean, emergency vehicles can't get through.
I mean, the problem you have is trying to start something that's not in existence right now. Again, meters work well in controlling traffic and identifying the message. I was fortunate to get on city council when they were in effect, and I was not involved in the legwork of installing them from the get-go. Technology has changed an awful lot, but that's something, again, we'd have to work with the county. We'd have to work with, your association and see exactly how we implement those. I mean, that's something that's going to take more time than utilizing cameras or putting in technology, because again, you got to work through logistics and how do you do that? What notice you have to give? There's a lot more legwork to make sure you want to implement that.
We haven't had a death thus far, but we have had where the alternative for someone to get off the island in an emergency is to take a helicopter, which is an enormous expense and insurance doesn't cover it. Will it take a death to get something done about that bottleneck in Matlacha?
Listen, I have empathy and sympathy for what you went through. We've had a death on Sanibel, not being able to get through the traffic. So I don't think that's the issue. You still have an issue that you can't just part the city. And there's just no way of moving the cars. We have one lane on and one lane off on Sanibel. So I understand the issue. And I don't think you could really utilize someone's action and or passing to try to do that. I mean, I think people are aware of the issue. I don't think people are trying to discount the issue. You just need to have more of a consensus. It is easier, and Scott does identify you being unincorporated, but you need to be uniformed in what your ask is and try to identify those steps. I think they all make sense, but just make sure you're all in consensus in doing so. It took a while, even as a city, with the structure, with the government, to try to navigate through this. We just didn't have a 20-minute, 30-minute presentation and went along with this. It was a series of steps. And again, whatever information we can share with you, I want to be able to do that so you're all informed in what you do.
Thanks. It looks like Carl Dygert has a question. Carl, you're muted. Oh.
Yeah. So parking in Matlacha could be increased by more within the community park, which is county run. There's plenty of space there to create more slots for parking in the park, within the park. It can even be paid parking to generate revenue. Regarding the bottleneck and the emergency vehicle thing, I am in total agreement that one of the biggest problems in Matlacha is that people park on the north side of the Pine Island Road in front of the shops. So now there is no way for an emergency vehicle to go through. Our association, Matlacha, has asked DOT to come in there and red stripe it, you know, loading zone only, and it needs enforcement. We don't get the enforcement to get those people off the north side of that lane, so that if an emergency vehicle comes through, they would have access to drive down that side of the road. So that's something that could be looked at.
Just to note on the north side, I was talking to the state, and they have plans to put a sidewalk bicycle path from the four-way stop all the way out to Burnt Store Road, 8 to 10 feet wide, and it will probably be on the north side of Pine Island Road. Be about 5 or 6 years before they do it, but they're in the planning stages. They're in the process of hiring a guy to do this, to do the study of what that entails. I'm not sure that's going to help things, but
That's great.
that's what the plan is. Kevin, I promised to get you out of here in a half an hour, but I did want to talk about the, I'll give you a chance to talk about the water quality problems we're having out at Tropical Point Beach. The county's been pretty unresponsive to our request that they do routine, regular testing out there. The enterococci, which is an indicator bacteria for fecal pollution, has been registered anywhere from 10 to 1,660 by certified lab results. And of course, 70 is the threshold. Anything over 70, it's unsafe to swim. And we do have kids out there swimming. I've seen some out there. They're up to their necks in the water. They just sit down and splash. So I mean, could you look into why the county's refusing to do this?
Well, you know, again, I wasn't as up to speed. I saw that come up on your agenda item. Sanibel, again, I go back to my own experience and bring it back full fold. Sanibel has a healthy beach program. So what you're looking to do is have the same apply to parks. And I understand that. That was funded by the state. And unfortunately, over the last couple of years, that funding has certainly been pulled back dramatically. We relied 100% of the funding actually from the state on the Healthy Beach program. And that was cut in half and then cut in half again during the process. I am certainly going to do whatever I can do to help water quality initiatives. And I understand that we had some of those same breaches and issues you had. I mean, you know, we had public beaches closed. I'm very familiar with the heavy rains, the summer, the issues that you do have. I mean, we experienced them firsthand. You know, the challenge, Scott, is going to be as we go to the delegation to try to make sure we have that funding program in effect. I do believe the governor is committed to water quality. You know, what we'd like to do is see what type of funds are available. And I am certainly one that believes, you know, parks should have the same, as John Cassani had indicated, should have the same type of testing as beaches. It really comes down to dollars and cents to make sure it's funded. And when you couldn't have beaches that are public beaches that create revenue, and those were cut off, you know, it becomes a challenge. That's the challenge of asking the delegation to make sure that Tallahassee does fund that, because it's under that program. And I think it's easier to expand that program to include parks than starting up a new program on its own. And that's what I would envision doing.
Well, the county does test out there when the school board asks them to, before they send a field trip out there. And the kids, they get up to, I've seen them, they're up to their chest in water, and they're looking at the baby shrimp and under the mangroves. It's a pretty cool field trip. I mean, I'd want to go on one. But they take an entire school bus out there of elementary school kids, 5th grade, 6th grade. And now, since they've heard about these problems, they generally call the county, and the county will go out and do a water test a day or two before they go out. But the county went out back in October last year, and they came out with a enterococcus level of 687, almost 10 times the safe level. And the only people they told were the school board. They didn't tell the rest of the public. You know, we didn't know. And so people from the island were still using it, even though the county knew it wasn't safe. That's just not right, Kevin.
Listen, I don't disagree. You know, the communication needs to be, and we need to inform the public at all times. I don't disagree. Again, you're going back, you know, Scott, to a program that there is money that's allocated from the state. It was set aside to park for beaches. There was money left over, so the county obviously utilized the appropriations relative to parks. So when you have an event, you're able to do that, and it also has a partner like the school board. Again, what you're asking is to broaden the Healthy Beach program to apply to parks. And I certainly don't have a problem as someone that represents this community to do so. A, you need to test, and B, you need to inform. I mean, I don't disagree with either one of those. And I ran on a water quality. I want to continue to make that a focus. And, you know, the challenge we have right now is making sure that we identify the areas that are problematic, and then obviously inform the public of that. I have no qualms with that. The challenge is, you know, I become a professional beggar when you go to Tallahassee, when you go and ask for the money associated, because there's money allocated and you get to utilize it when you do so. And that's what you are. And having been at this for a long time, having developed the relationships, I don't have a problem asking for money. I've never been shy. And quite frankly, you're part of my district. I asked for this job. So, you know, if I'm not going to make the ask, then shame on me, but I'll make the ask. I have no problem with that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
No
I have a question again. Testing and communications is a good first step forward, but we all know what the source is. There's some septic system in the area that is leaking and not working properly. Can the Department of Health at Lee County identify which septic system is the culprit and fix it? Because everything else we do of testing and communicating is not addressing the problem in the first place.
You're right. I mean, you need to go back to the DNA source and say, okay, that's where it is. There, you know, this legislative session, there'll be $25 million set aside for septic. So again, we go back to what I want to try to do at the delegation, since I'm the chairman. There'll be an issue I'll be asking for, is to have the necessary funds, and you don't make a request. Last year, you know, Sanibel asked for $750,000, which they received, only 16 units left, but there was no one in the county to put the money or put the request in. I'll certainly work with the delegation, but work with Noel Valenstein from the Department of Environmental Protection, ask for the funding. I agree with you. The other thing that I wanted to try to do is, I was meeting with the local delegation to have some type of regular testing on all septics, whether you have that every 3 years or when it changes ownership. I think it's necessary to do the testing. You identify where the breaches and the leaches are, and you address the issue, and you know about it. I mean, until we start to do some type of regular testing of some sort, you're never going to identify. You're always going to be reactive instead of proactive.
Sherry,
In the meantime, could we put a sign up saying that it's not necessarily safe to swim here or something like that?
Signage is certainly the easiest way to communicate to the public.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Kevin. I just want to say you're the first commissioner to come out in the island, even though you're virtually here. We appreciate that. In 5 years. 5 years. I think the last time was when a commissioner came out when we were redoing the land use plan. And of course, that was Commissioner Manning. And so we appreciate the time that you've given us.
No problem. Scott, if you just want to, you know, summarize what we talked about, write it to me and put them in the priority order, because, you know, again, make sure there's consensus, but I'm really here to represent you, try to do whatever I can do to help. I ran on certain issues. You all know my issues of water quality, so I want to certainly be there and help any way I possibly can. Let me be your advocate. Let me be your spokesperson. So,
We'd like
Kevin, do we need to apply to be a healthy beach?
We're not technically a beach.
I think what I'd like to try to do
Park.
is make sure we have the funding for beaches and then try to expand beaches to parks as well. You have school boards, so I can meet with some of the school board people. You know, the delegation meetings are right around the corner, and having just ran with most of the people on the local delegation, you know, have some consensus. You have children using parks, you have people using parks. So all I'm doing is trying to expand beaches to parks and allow the funding that's set aside, because what Scott said earlier was, you know, they know a group of people come out, students come out, and they would test ahead of time. Well, that's because the money's set aside. What we'd like to do is have parks included in beach, you know, in testing of beaches, because again, it's public use of waterways. And what I want to try to do is identify when we have an issue and notify the public so they're not putting themselves in harm's way. I don't want to see anyone, you know, swim, bathe, or do anything in water that has bacterial levels that are off the charts. And I witnessed it firsthand on Sanibel. The speaker that said earlier, most times it's been a breach. We had them out in the Sanibel beaches when South Seas would have, you know, an overrun of their septic system, and it would all just pour out in the Gulf. And all of a sudden we'd go from 0 to, you know, tens of thousands. And we knew where the culprit was. We did the DNA testing. So again, here to do that. I don't have a problem. Again, just when you come up with consensus, Scott, send me what your requests are. We'll start the ball rolling.
I will do that, sir. Thank you.
No problem. I appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully next time I can see you all in person.
Yeah.
It'll be a while.
Thank
We
you.
were all wishing for that too.
We're hoping for the vaccine to get out sooner than later. Thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Have a great evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Okay, Jeff, you're up next, man. As a lot of people may know or not know, at our September general meeting, we had an almost unanimous vote. I think one person voted against it to oppose the 110-foot-high Doppler radar tower that's being proposed by Wink News. Basically, just because NBC has one and they want one too. There's no need for it, and it's a complete infraction and violation of the Pine Island Land Use Plan, which would limit that tower to about 40 feet. There's a lot of other issues, but the main thing to me personally is the height restriction is the crown jewel of the Pine Island Plan. And if these guys get away with it, it's going to be the camel's nose in the tent. And Jeff's been doing a lot of work on this, and he's prepared a presentation for us. Jeff, you live in Bokeelia, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Nadine, are you going to put it up, or should I share my screen? And you're on mute now.
You should be able to share your screen. I made you co-host.
Okay, I saw that come up.
If you can't, might have to make you host.
I think he ought to be able to do it. I think everybody is allowed to share the screen on this.
There he goes. You're doing it. You're good.
Made it?
Yep.
All right. Well, just by way of introduction to everybody, my wife Lisa and I visited Pine Island back in January, February of 2019 as first-time snowbirds from Wisconsin. And we absolutely fell in love with the island. We loved the low-key, rural, laid-back nature of the island, the old Florida feel, the wildlife, and the beauty of the island. And we bought a home and moved down here in August of 2019 as full-time residents of Pine Island. And we live off of Marina Drive on Towe Court in Bokeelia. And we just absolutely love it here. So we're just celebrating our first anniversary with knowledge that we have a Doppler radar proposed. And I'd like to go through a presentation that's probably more detailed than I normally would, and I'll try and get through it quickly. But I wanted to leave this behind so we could post this on the Greater Pine Island Civic Association website. And as I continue to modify this and potentially give other presentations, it could be a great leave behind and a reference tool. So starting, already I'm having troubles with advancing the slide. try this. There we go. So what I want to cover is the WINC proposal, the variance and exceptions that they are seeking, Lisa and my opposition rationale, and then some potential next steps. So as Scott indicated, WINC, or Fort Myers Broadcasting Company, is proposing to build a Doppler radar tower on Pine Island. And this is the purported gap in the Doppler radar coverage that they are trying to meet the need with the circle around the label Sanibel Island, although it's proposed for Pine Island, with existing Doppler towers providing, in their view, insufficient coverage. This is the location on Pine Island. You can see the subject property right here in St. James City on the southern portion of the island at 4798 Stringfellow Road. And this is the parcel, 178 acres, this whole parcel here that's owned by WINC, and that's where they are proposing to put the tower. You can see just to the north is the KOA campground, so that kind of gives you an idea of where this is at. Here's the parcel of land, and I put a red circle around where the tower is being proposed, and this whole area is zoned commercial, and the tower that will be built there is on a 100-foot by 100-foot parcel that they're seeking variances and exceptions for that I'll go to in a minute. This is a simulation of what the tower would look like from Stringfellow Road based on the application that WINC has made. So you just get an idea. It's like a big golf ball on a lattice tower. And here's a kind of an elevation of the tower. It's 110 feet as Scott described. It's got a 20-foot diameter dome on top, and it's got a lattice support structure, which is an issue, which I'll come to in a minute. So the tower specs, it's called the Defender C1000 C-band radar system. It's got 1 million watts of power, and it's operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It has 360 degrees of coverage, a range of about 125 miles. The power is equivalent to roughly 5 to 25 times the power of a full capacity cell tower. It varies because typically a rural cell will have 500 watts of power and an urban cell will only have 100 watts. So there's some variation there. It is a dual polarization technology, which gives you both horizontal and vertical transmission. And the vertical transmissions allow better coverage of weather closer to the ground, obviously, and measurements of rainfall. It operates within a 5.5 to 5.7 gigahertz frequency, which I'll come to in a minute, which is in the cell tower and cell phone frequency range. And it's got 25.7 trillion watts of effective radiated power. I need to educate myself better on the implications of that. I put the definition below, but I'm not going to get into it because I don't know totally what the implications are, but the number by itself scared me. This is the variance or special exception process. You can see that the county receives an application, the staff reviews it. In this particular case, they found it insufficient in terms of information. So they responded to the applicant, WINC, and had some additional requests for information. The applicant has submitted the information. The staff reviewed it again, and they went back and said, we still have some concerns and need this additional information, and we're awaiting the second response of WINC. So we're kind of focused right in this area right now, but eventually when the application is deemed sufficient, then they schedule a hearing examiner meeting, which generally is about 60 days out. You can see that reference down here. And then, oops, I got something that came up on my screen. Is that visible on your screens?
No.
Okay. Nevertheless, the hearing examiner then goes through a hearing process, and in 30 days, the hearing examiner renders a decision. So the variance or special exception process has, one, a statutory limit that the planning staff cannot ask any more questions beyond the original scope of their letter asking for more information. So they have to be very, very thorough in terms of what they come back with and make sure that they're covering all bases. It was described to me that the variance or exception process is like a three-legged stool. The applicant in the hearing process makes a presentation, the staff makes a presentation and a recommendation, and then they allow public comment. And they focus on what they called competent and substantial evidence that is relevant to how the hearing examiner can make a decision. And an example that I quizzed them on, I said, well, can you provide some academic research on any issues? And they said, yes, but if it gets to be a debatable topic, it's probably better to have an expert witness there. So I have to kind of digest that and figure out what the implications of that are. And then as legitimate questions in the hearing process surface, the applicant's able to rebut the public response. But if the applicant proposes some changes to maybe address some resistance, or their defense opens up some new issues, then the hearing examiner can reopen the hearing to public comments. So in this particular case, Wink has had their first submission. They did that back in July, and they are seeking, one, a special exception to the height of a wireless tower, an antenna, which is limited to 90 feet, and they want to allow construction of a 110-foot Doppler radar tower. And then they're seeking two variance requests specific to Pine Island. One is that the overall height of the wireless communication facility is a maximum of 45 feet, and it varies. There's some measurements based on sea level, but let's just say 45 feet, and obviously they want to allow for the full 110 feet. So one's height, and then secondly, the Lee County Development Code indicates that wireless towers have to be a monopole design, you know, a single solid pole that you see with transmitters on it. And they are seeking a variance to allow for the lattice antenna supporting structure, which they claim is necessary in order to support the radar facility and is standard construction practice. Then Wink came back with some updates in response to the questions that the staff had, and they expanded some of the public safety benefits and explanations for same. They specifically cited some safety benefits for Pine Island because of being subject to flooding and storm surges. They explained why the radar tower won't work in other locations, which I'll address in a minute. They explained why the old Wink Doppler tower, it shouldn't say tower, it's just the Doppler radar unit was dismantled. I think the tower still is there. They had some information on migratory and listed bird species assessment. They documented a community planning meeting that was held back on September 2nd, but didn't include any answers to those questions. And they described how the data will reach the benefiting organizations. And, you know, basically, it goes from the data collection to the Wink meteorologists. They translate and disseminate the information to the public and emergency management agencies through broadcast, TV, radio, and website access. So they're kind of the, you know, the keeper of the gate, so to speak, as to what and when it goes out. And they made a comment they can enable the National Weather Service forecast in cooperation with Wink. And this was a key issue, I think, for the planning department. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And the last item, that is, about the data. Then the planning department went back with some further requests for information. They wanted to further clarify that whole transmission of data. They also commented that the height variances must also be found to maintain the health, safety, and welfare of the general public, and not just the welfare of the customers or residents of the property in question. They're concerned only Wink customers would be the primary beneficiaries. This is, I think, a key issue that the planning department, they use the term in my next bullet point about, you know, the utility, a public utility approach to this data, as opposed to more of a commercial benefit and a gatekeeper to the information. So they're still concerned with a couple policies, one being the public utility argument, and the second one being whether this is consistent with the coastal rural character and unique culture of Greater Pine Island, which Scott commented it earlier on the introduction. So I'm not going to read through this, but it's there for reference. If this goes on the website, you can read it. But I pretty well summarized it. It's basically the public utility and benefit of everybody policy. And then I want to reference one thing on the policy about the rural future land use category that this parcel falls within. And one of the items there I've highlighted in red, and they say uses are limited to those that reflect the coastal rural character and unique culture of Greater Pine Island, such as animal clinics, bait and tackle shops, ecotourism, farm and feed supply stores, food stores, lawn and garden supply stores, restaurants, excluding fast food, roadside produce stands, specialty retail, and plant nurseries. So they're trying to create this culture of commercial development that is small business. I label it more mom and pop business. And I don't see how a 110-foot radar tower fits, within that definition. Just, Lisa's and my opposition and other people that we talk to have a number of issues. I want to focus on one that's of great concern to us, and that's the whole health concern. And this is a slide showing the electromagnetic spectrum, and you can see there's non-ionizing radiation. You hear that term, that's TV, radio, cell phones, Doppler radar towers, Wi-Fi, etc., microwave ovens. And then you get into the right side, ionizing, which is much more dangerous, X-rays and eventually radioactive sources. And I've circled in red the 5 gigahertz, which is where this radar tower would be operating, which is in the microwave section and is consistent with some of the bands or frequencies that are used for cell phones. Major concern is current standards in the whole telecommunication industry are based on a thermal test, and there has been a lot, hundreds and probably thousands of studies on the biological effects on sales of radio frequency or electromagnetic frequency transmission. And this chart just kind of summarizes on the left some of the things in our bodies that are impacted by this, and on the right side what some of the problems are in terms of health issues surrounding each of those areas. And you can see there's issues that have been researched on brain tumors, blood-brain barrier, all sorts of sleep and memory, confusion issues, and cancer, and a number of cardiac issues have been cited. There was a 2007 bioinitiative report that was updated in 2012 that has determined that electromagnetic fields are linked to cancers, neurological problems, and DNA damage. And in the appendix, I have a list of studies, and it's incomplete. I was having difficulty getting a couple of them in. But this is the most comprehensive scientific research on the biological effects, and I think it's pretty compelling. In addition, there's a U.S. International Electromagnetic Field Scientist Appeal signed by 225 scientists that concluded that the agency setting safety standards have failed to impose sufficient guidelines to protect the public. There's a Congress on Idiopathic Environmental Intolerance in Brussels, Belgium, signed by 200 scientists that asked the World Health Organization for stronger regulations on microwave transmission. There's an author of a very, very interesting book, Arthur Fistenberg. He wrote the book, The Invisible Rainbow, and talks about the evolution of electricity. And I won't go through all the detail here, but I would highly recommend it. My wife says it's the best book she's ever read. But they talk about extreme fluctuations in blood pressure, heart rhythm disorders, heart attacks, strokes, significant impacts on the coronary system. And there's a Physicians for Safe Technology with the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology that also point out some of the abnormal functioning as a result of oxidation and inflammation pathways in the body as a result of their microwave transmission. There's more here. Again, I'm not going to get into all the detail. The Swiss Alps had a study on a radio tower that boosted the power level to about half of what this tower is. They found a number of issues. Latvia had concerns about a tower bordering Russia. They found that school children lived as far away as 12 miles, suffered from impaired motor function, memory loss, and attention deficiencies. And you can see some of the other items listed there. In Poland, they also complained about health issues on the Warsaw Central Radio Tower, and I've listed some of the incidents of various health issues. Interestingly, the Vatican has a significant radio broadcast, and a public prosecutor considered negligent homicide for the former president of the Vatican Radio Management Committee. And they did a National Cancer Institute of Milan study, and they found children from age 1 to 14 who live roughly 4 to 8 miles from the towers developed leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma at 8 times the rate of children who live further away. And then there are cities that are taking actions. Belgium's halted 5G due to adverse health effects, and 5G is in the same range as this Doppler tower in terms of frequency. Ireland counties have halted 5G. Italy, there's 14 municipalities, including Rome, that stopped 5G. France has banned Wi-Fi in nursery schools. Switzerland adopts a moratorium and blocked 320 of 326 antennas. And here in the United States, Santa Barbara, California, halted the license agreement with Verizon due to health concerns. So it's migrating here too. So that's probably more detail than you want, but we are pretty passionate about the health concerns with this changing and the amount of radiation that is being transmitted in the air, which is increasing day in and day out.
Jeff, I wanted to ask you about what I thought was probably the way that this tower could be stopped, and that's in the Pine Island Land Use Plan.
Yeah.
Section, I don't want to bore everybody, but I just want to get the reference right. Section 33-1087, maximum height of buildings and structures.
Right.
And that'd be paragraph E. Any variances from these height restrictions require all of the findings in section blah, 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 with the sole exception being where the relief is required to maintain or improve the health, safety, or welfare of the general public, not just the health, safety, or welfare of the owners, customers, occupants, or residents of the property in question. Now, the problem Wink has is they're competing with NBC, who already has a Doppler radar tower in Fort Myers, which makes this totally redundant and unnecessary, but that's a side issue.
Wink had one too, Scott.
Yeah, they did, but they should have fixed it. The problem is for them, if they share this with the general public and everybody else, they lose their competitive advantage by having a dual radar Doppler, whatever that is, which I think the NBC only has a single.
Yeah.
How are they overcoming that? I know they the county kicked it back to them in October and said, you know, you really haven't addressed that issue.
Right.
Have they addressed that issue now? I haven't seen anything. You're on top of this more than I am.
Well, they attempted to address it, but the county's gone back and said, we're still not comfortable.
Let me comment here, if you would. I have a tremendous amount of experience in land use issues. Right now, that property is in the future land use map as coastal rural.
Mm-hmm.
Putting a Doppler radar tower is not a permitted use in that future land use map.
Mm-hmm.
What happened many years ago was the county went through the whole county, the county commissioners went through the whole county, and they changed the future land use map. But there's old zoning that never was changed to map the future land use. So the old commercial zoning on this site is not applicable to the future land use map. So the only way that they could ever get this use on that site legally would be if they asked the county for a future land use map amendment. So when you go to the hearing, everybody needs to say that this Doppler tower is not a permitted use in that future land use category, coastal rural. And that's all there is to it, because they can't get variances if they can't meet the requirements of the comprehensive plan, which they can't.
Well, Noel,
Okay. Thanks,
that
Noel.
it doesn't seem to be any part of their application to do that. And the county hasn't addressed it from what I've seen in their
That's
findings.
because that issue has not been made. The county staff will not be the determining party in whether that is legal or illegal. The hearing examiner will be, but the hearing examiner is an attorney, and if you get Donna Marie, she is absolutely excellent, and she knows the law quite well, and it's clear from the law, and that's why you see the hesitation on the part of staff, because they're going to get pressure because of the political power of the TV station to approve this.
Right.
And so they're in between. And so what they're going to do is they're going to piece together information and say, I requested more and more information. And so now we're saying that they gave us all this additional information and our file is sufficient. And once that happens, it goes to a schedule with a hearing examiner, and that's where you make your legal case. I don't think you're going to get anywhere with all of these health requirements. These health scares, they're real, and they actually happen. There's data on them, but I don't think with the hearing examiner they're going to hold any weight whatsoever. It's strictly going to be based on the legal interpretation of the comprehensive plan so it can withstand a court challenge. That's how it works.
And you go back to your prior comment that if they want to build a tower there, they have to change the land use, get an amendment to allow it.
That's right. And so
a land classification that would allow it.
That's correct. And then there's no way we're going to stand for that at all, because why do you want to put a different land use when everything around that property is already coastal rural?
Right.
So they're not going to get anywhere with it.
Can you define what coastal rural is? What
A
does that
coastal
mean?
rural category was a new category that was made for Pine Island. And only Pine Island is the only place in the county that has that category. And it was made that category so only very particular uses, which I thought Jeff did a good job when he gave you and read the list of businesses that could be approved in the coastal rural category. It's very limited. It's all mom and pop operations to keep people on the island, to cut the trips off the island. So that whole plan, when Phil and I worked on it and put it together, was to limit what you could put in coastal rural. And you cannot put these towers because the height restriction that's the holy grail for Pine Island.
Right.
Yep.
And we can't, if we allow this tower to do it, then how are we going to hold the line on a 20-story building?
Right.
So we have to make that argument to the hearing examiner, and we have to go, as many of us as can go, because once you're on the record at the hearing examiner, then you can speak to the county commissioners. You can speak at the county commission hearing also. But if you're not a party of record, you cannot speak to the county commissioners.
Are you talking if there's an appeal, Noel?
No.
Okay.
Here in a case like this, where they're asking to put a use that's not permitted in a future land use category, the county commissioners will more than likely make the final decision.
Right. They rule on the zoning decisions, not the variances. For rezoning. For rezoning.
This is the zoning on this property has no bearing because of the fact that it's in future rural, coastal rural. So therefore the zoning doesn't matter at all. Like if you could have all the commercial zoning in the world, you can't go over there and build commercial on that property. You'd have to go in and change the future land use map first. And that's the reason we have a local planning agency, because that's all the LPA does is hear cases on future land use map amendments. They don't hear any zoning cases.
Didn't you used to be on that committee, Noel?
17 years.
Sounds like you'd be a good expert.
Well, yeah, I would definitely want to coordinate with Jeff here, and I would plan to speak at the hearing, to the hearing examiner.
We've had one discussion, but we'll have more, Noel.
Yeah, keep me in the
Noel,
loop.
not Noel.
And after seeing your presentation tonight, which I thought was excellent, and we have to go in and we have to say we do not want you changing our coastal rural category and putting things in there that weren't designed to go in there.
Right. Okay.
Is there a public hearing on the radar yet?
No.
Okay.
I think it might be a good idea to make Jeff's presentation to as many groups on the island as he can get together. If I were there, I'd be happy to be with him. But we need, when it comes time for the hearing and
people.
some of his presentation, we need people, and we
Right.
won't get people until we get
Right.
people informed, advised, and uptight about it.
I agree completely.
I thank you. I can't see who's speaking because my screen is full of the presentation.
Sherry.
It's
Oh,
Sherry.
Sherry. Okay, Sherry, thanks.
He's our treasurer.
Okay.
All right,
Well,
guys. Well,
should I quickly keep going through here?
well, we've run over our time limit.
Let me get to next steps then. I mean, there's some information about the migratory birds that they did. And my question is whether it included, flights, not just the nesting. We've talked about not fitting the coastal rural character in our discussion, so I won't go any more into that. And I want to get up to some next steps here. I'm going to make an editorial comment here. I think it's ironic that Wink is seeking a variance to the height restrictions when A, they will benefit from the prior historical enforcement, and they're assuming what makes this a prime site is that future enforcement of height restrictions will eliminate blockages, and yet they're the only deserving recipient of the height variance.
I just looked at your presentation and also saw that in terms of the location, when you put that red circle on at the beginning, there's double coverage up by Punta Gorda, and there's a gap north of Naples. I don't know, down by Estero someplace.
Yeah.
It would actually be better centered if it were south on the mainland someplace.
I forget what the scale was on those rings, how far they went, but it goes 125 miles, so that would certainly include Naples, right?
Well, the red circle did not cover Naples.
No,
Go ahead.
The amount that they told us, the 125 miles, it has to do with it's the sweet spot of the Doppler radar when actually it can go more than 350 miles.
Right.
Oh my.
Was that Deborah Swisher Hicks talking?
Yeah, it's trouble.
Okay. Hello, Deborah. Well, how about if I jump to some next steps and wrap it up? One of the things that actually Deborah, who just spoke, she's been doing a lot of work on this too with her Facebook group, a small group. It's not open to the public. She's trying to manage the group there and has in opposition to this. And she and I are trying to figure out how we can collaborate and not duplicate effort. And one of the things we talked about is forming an ad hoc committee. In my stupor of trying to be creative, I said, maybe we call it radar, Residents Against Doppler Radar. But we talked about 5 key focus areas. Noel's saying there's really only one that's really important, but talk about the zoning and variance objections, which I'd be willing to chair because I've done a lot of work in that area. My wife, Lisa, would be willing and interested in doing the health impact in spite of Noel's comments. getting us to influence the court of public opinion, and that's communities getting information out, marketing, our objection. We don't have anyone that's leading that now. It could be Facebook, it could be references for flyers going to Facebook, and then fact checking all the information. Deborah has had experience in some hearing processes and would be willing to lead that. And I think, is it Catherine Greenleaf, Deborah, that would want to focus on wildlife impact?
Yeah, I spoke to her briefly regarding it, and she seemed willing to spearhead that at this point, but she is based out of state currently, and she's online. So.
Yeah, I'm right here. I'm more than willing to help. I'm more than willing to help with the wildlife aspect.
I can see it's a C, not a K, too.
That's okay. No, there is evidence to show that the level of radiation on a tower of this type can cause third-degree high-voltage burns, which could actually kill any bird that attempts to land. And the high-pitched noise has the potential to drive wildlife away from that area. So there would be probably no nesting in that area.
Okay. Well, Noelle, I'd like to follow up with you based on your comments, and I don't want to put a lot of effort into areas that are going to have, marginal returns. So maybe you and I can chat offline a little further about that if you're willing.
Sure, call me or email me anytime.
Okay, thanks, Noelle.
Really quickly, this is Jamie DeLacy, just for, to put this out there. I would also maybe, when you talk about the wildlife, consider talking about the bats. We used to have so many bats on Pine Island, and it's one of the best defenses against our mosquito population. And we have just seen a huge decline. And I can't help but think that this tower would not be good for, night flying or anything like that. So that's just what was popping up in my head as you were saying the part about the wildlife.
Thank you. So piggybacking on Sherry's comments, I've, looked at, I've talked to Cindy Bickford on St. James City Civic Association. When I give her this presentation, she'll get that posted. I've tried to reach out to Susan McGuire on Roar. Sherry is offered to help, as she just indicated. John and Marty Kendall at the Pine Island Garden Club. They gave a presentation there. And I want to talk with them, although they kind of maintain a neutral view because they don't want to offend past donors or future ones. So I'm interested in input. We don't have to do it right now. You can shoot me a text or an email. Scott has the information.
No, Jeff, there's new people here tonight.
Your email address, or do you mind if I share your email address in the chat?
You can go ahead and share it, and you can share my phone number, which I'm going to give to you right now.
Go ahead.
262-639-1234.
Okay, I'll put that chat box here in just a sec.
And you got also,
I'd like to point out that you guys have set up a Facebook page for this. I think it's called Protect Our Skies. What is it again?
Well, Deborah's done. I'll let Deborah speak to that.
Yeah, there is a Facebook page regarding it. I unfortunately don't have the exact number, the name of it. It's not necessarily public. Kind of have to be a friend of a friend. I'm trying to figure out how to open that up a little bit more, but it's Save Our Sky, no to Doppler or no to the tower or something of that. Yeah, I don't have my paper.
Maybe we can get that information in the presentation when you are comfortable with that, Deb.
I can sure do that. And if anybody wants to text me, in this thing that they want to belong to it, I can search you out and add you to my list. There's some questions, periodic questions you need to answer beforehand. But yes.
Can you share your number then?
Yes. Well, I'll send it out to everybody.
Okay.
And then we can get that group bigger. I drop every piece of information I can on that one. So if there's anybody that needs to do quick research on something, it's usually relatively easy to find there if you're Facebook friendly.
Sherry Perkins here. Do you want to contact Crow out on Sanibel to see, they might have information on the effects of Doppler on wildlife? That's number one. Number two, I think your best way to communicate to people locally is through the Eagle. Would you want to have a series of articles, one on health, one on this, one on that, in the Eagle? And number 3, I noticed you mentioned John and Marty Kendall with the Garden Club. Did you also contact them as Calusa Land Trust representatives?
I am doing that. I think, Scott, you had some discussion previously and they were taking kind of a neutral view.
No. That's
Wasn't you?
I've had some discussions with other environmental issues with them in the past, and they really don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. They want to acquire and maintain land.
I will still get a hold of them.
Sure. I mean, they're great people.
Contact.
I mean, they're us, but
yeah,
you know, who wants to piss off Wink News? You know.
All right.
We do.
Scott, I think that's it.
Okay. All right. We're all done. All right. Listen, I'll tell you, Jeff, that was a great presentation. I appreciate it. I'm so glad I met you and Deborah at that meeting they had that Wink News threw for us. We'll put this on the agenda every month of our general meeting until this thing is resolved.
Well, we won't go through a detailed presentation like that. I was trying to establish a base level for everybody to kind of where we're at on this.
Okay, well, we'll keep it up to date, all right?
We may not get any more participants in your meeting.
Well, we had 25 participants. Well, we got 23 now.
Good.
That's pretty good, man. We had like 17 last month.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Scott.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Without objection, I'm going to adjourn.
So moved.
Adjourned. Thank you all.
Thanks much.
Everyone have a good night.
Evening.
Stay safe.
Night.